Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Zachary Taylor, Part 3. Today we'll wrap up the life and times of Zachary Taylor. In the 1848 U.S. presidential election, Zach Taylor was elected the 12th U.S. president. And there were a lot of election songs. Three of them were A Little More Grape, Hail to Old Zach, and Our Brave Rough and Ready. A little more grape. The old hero stands on the brow of the hill, with his heart in the thick of the fray, where his squadrons beneath him are battling still, on the eve of that terrible day. This is about the Battle of Buena Vista in the Mexican War. His quick eye has numbered the mustering bands, and he points to the enemy's flag, while the battery answers the old man's commands. A little more grape, Mr. Bragg. The foemen charge home with a thundering shock and a touch of Castilian pride. They dash on our lines like a wave on a rock when a storm is abroad on the tide. The wave falleth back, but the rock standeth still. There is heart in that bristling crag, and the old man stands yet on the brow of the hill. A little more grape, Captain Bragg. Then spoke the loud cannon, it thundered again, like spirits they scream in the air. And the fallen are lying in swaths on the plain. Death's busiest reapers are there. But now is the song of those death reapers still, yet let not our battle song lag. Hurrah to the old man who stood on the hill, and a little more grape, Captain Bragg. Hail to old Zach, another song. Hail to old Zach, in triumph advancing. Honored by us be his ever dear name. Long may these states, with his bright banner glancing, be happy and cherish his glory and fame. Our tried and brave defender, he ne'er will surrender, but boldly press on, careful and steady, while every tongue and pen sends back the shout again. Honor the hero, brave, rough and ready. Taylor's no slim sapling, by chance near a fountain, blooming in spring and in winter to fade. When storms other leaves have clean stripped the mountain, the more shall we freemen exult in his shade. Moored on the tried rock, proof against slander's shock, the firmer he stands while the ruder it blows. Free men and women, then, sound forth his praise again. Honor the hero, brave, rough and ready. Rouse, freemen, rouse and remember your station. Up to your work for the cause of the land. Oh, that the people composing this nation were once more united in one solid band, to beat the loco crew in spite of all they do. Cass is their leader, his name's beyond the sea, but he cannot escape from a little more grape. Honor the hero, brave, rough and ready. Hail the bright prospect that rises to vision. Old Zach will conquer as he has before, bright on the banners of every division. His name is lettered with that of Fillmore. May his glory in the west soon fill our loved east, all through the Union to shine bright and steady. Then all the Whigs, far and near, will, with a hearty cheer, honor the hero, brave, rough and ready. Another song, Our Brave, Rough and Ready. On Mexico's plains the wild war trump was heard, and falchions were flashing in battle's wild splendor. Our hero was there, and each heart was stirred, as we marched 'neath the flag of our country's defender. Palo Alto grew red, and Resca in dread heard the cries of the foemen who trembled and fled, while our brave, rough and ready in triumph rode on, in the van of the fray till the victory was won. On Monterey's heights would our chieftain's bright sword, and the stars and stripes where it pointed ascended, foot to foot, breast to breast, at our captain's bold sword. Fought the son of the north with the foes who defended, and the rifle's loud crack, and the voice of old Zach struck the foemen with terror and scattered them back. While our brave Rough and Ready in triumph rode on, in the van of the fray, till the victory was won. Another song, Rough and Ready. We'll sing a song to suit the times, with voices bold and steady, and cheerily we'll tell in rhyme of good old Rough and Ready. His foes may slander as they can, and bluster at his manners. Who cares a fig? He's just the man to lead the Yankee banners. Then Rough and Ready, let it ring, and set the bells a-chiming. Where'er we go, we're bound to sing his praises in our rhyming. In Florida he gained a name that won our admiration, and loudly has his gallant fame been echoed through the nation. There's not a heart in all the land that beats not firm and steady for the hero of the Rio Grande, old gallant Rough and Ready. At Monterey he showed the world that Yankees are ne'er daunted. The flag of freedom he unfurled and on the towers planted. Old Zach's the boy for Santa Ana, Ampudia, or Arista, and long 'twill ere they forget the field of Buena Vista. Another song, Song for Election Day. We're going to make a president. We want you all to come. There's bound to be a mighty fuss and lots and gobs of fun. We're not going to electioneer or lead you off the track, but merely hint about a man they sometimes call Old Zach. Walk up and try to make it handy just before you drop your vote to think of Rio Grande. Hearty and hail. Another song, Old Rough and Ready. Hearty and hail on the downhill of life, nurtured by labor and strengthened by strife, grave from exposure where danger was rife. Our Zach has grown rough and grown old, quick as the flash from the flint and the steel, prompt to express what his bosom may feel, eager to show a true patriot's zeal. He is watchful and ready and bold, old like the oak in whose age we delight, rough like the diamond whose heart is still bright, ready to wake like watchdog at night when the wolves shall break into the fold. Long may he yet live to his country and cared, long as its chief ruler may he be revered, by friends well beloved and by enemies feared. When the tales of his powers are told, another song, Campaign of 48. Ye Whigs who won for Harrison, and ye who bravely fought for Clay, arrange your forces and unite for him who conquered Monterey. Then trust him with the ship of state, he'll ever have its good in view, and though dark perils may await, we'll bring it safe to harbor too. Support him well, old Rough and Ready, be true, ye Whigs, be firm and steady. Now, there's a story during the war, a Mexican General Vega was captured and presented to General Zach Taylor, and Taylor had this to say to the Mexican general who was a prisoner, quote, I do assure you, General Vega, that I regret this misfortune has fallen upon you. I regret it sincerely and insist on returning your sword, which you yielded up when captured, after having this day wielded it with so much gallantry. And General Vega stayed in Zach Taylor's tent for a time before he was sent to New Orleans as a prisoner. So this is wonderful. Respect for the noble opponent who had been defeated. Samuel Reed, who was one of the people there with Taylor, reported that General Taylor was deluged with letters, and he spent a lot of time answering them. He was telling some of the guys about it, and he said that one letter was from a boy who was 14 years old who wanted to enlist in the army and asked for advice. And another was from an Irish mother who wanted to know if her son was killed because she hadn't received a letter recently from him. Samuel C. Reed wrote, quote, We are sure that such letters would not have received attention at Washington, but both of them were answered by the general, carrying out the old maxim, "Nothing is beneath the attention of a great man." We left him impressed with the great goodness of his heart. So Zach Taylor was elected, and by March of 1849, his inauguration day came in Washington, and he was inaugurated. Now, he was a Whig president. The Democrats controlled Congress, and he had a lot of major challenges as the country was headed towards civil war, the growing controversy. Ironically, before the Mexican War, opponents of slavery thought, oh, this is terrible because it's going to add more slave states. And this was the big issue, the big controversy. So the question is, when this huge territory had been added to the country, and the question is, when states carved from that territory were added, would they be slave or free? During his presidency, Zach Taylor there were funerals for James K. Polk, who died, the previous president, and Dolly Madison, wife of James Madison. Reportedly, Zach Taylor coined the term First Lady with respect to Dolly Madison. Now, at the White House, his daughter Betty was reportedly the queen downstairs. She really acted as First Lady. His wife Margaret, known as Peggy, was upstairs and entertaining friends and relatives. President Taylor was known for taking long walks in Washington without any security. Now, during his presidency, only 16 months, California and New Mexico both were pushing for statehood, and Texas was trying to take over part of New Mexico. So there were different issues. There was northern opposition to the slave trade in Washington, and the South wanted a strong fugitive slave law passed, where when slaves that had escaped, gone north to freedom, they could be recaptured and brought south with federal support. Now, by this time, California and New Mexico had large populations, so they were eager for statehood, and President Zach Taylor had these very tough issues to face. North against South, and the abolitionists against the slave owners. May of 1849, there was a cholera epidemic. It killed 10% of the people in St. Louis and Cincinnati. In July, the epidemic was so severe that President Zach Taylor declared a national day of prayer. In August of 49, he took a trip to Pennsylvania and New York with stops in Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Erie, Pennsylvania, Albany, New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, and then back to Washington. Big crowds, gala events. He got tired. He was an old guy. He was sick in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Got really sick in Erie, Pennsylvania. Decided to skip Boston and just go home to the White House. Now, Taylor, he owned slaves. He owned 200 slaves in his home in Louisiana, but he was personally against the extension of slavery in the new territories. 1849 was the California Gold Rush. In 49, there were 10,000 European descent Americans in California, and 8,000 Indians. The previous year, gold had been discovered, so there was the gold rush, large population influx. At the time, it had a military government which needed to end. Civilian rule was coming, and statehood. Now, if you wanted to travel to California in 1849, the most popular method was to take a ship to Panama in Central America and then cross over on land by horse and wagon, and then take a ship to San Francisco. There was a California State Convention held in which the majority expressed a desire for California to enter the United States as a free state. In October of 49, President Taylor traveled to Baltimore and attended the state fair for Maryland. He watched a plowing match, and according to the newspapers, quote, with an expert eye. December of 1849, President Taylor gave his State of the Union message. The United States had a debt of $16 million, which was connected to borrowing money to pay for the Mexican War and also the purchase of California and New Mexico. He promoted a tariff for a national income and to protect industry. He also promoted a transcontinental railroad to connect the East and West and to connect with California and Oregon. He also expressed support for independence for Hungary against Austria. And he had this to say in his address, quote, "For more than half a century, during which kingdoms and empires have fallen, this Union has stood unshaken. The patriots who formed it have long since descended to the grave. Yet still it remains the proudest monument to their memory, and the object of affection and admiration with everyone worthy to bear the American name. In my judgment, its dissolution would be the greatest of calamities, and to avert that should be the study of every American. Upon its preservation must depend our own happiness, and that of countless generations to come. Whatever dangers may threaten it, I shall stand by it and maintain its integrity to the full extent of the obligations imposed and the powers conferred upon me by the Constitution." And everybody could see that the country was the possibility of breaking up because of the severe conflict over slavery. And President Taylor was expressing his strong hope that that the Union could be preserved. 1849, again, there was this territorial dispute between New Mexico and Texas. And New Mexico had a petition to join the Union as a free state. Now, again, the challenge between this conflict between free states and slave states, the issue of Utah, which at the time was called Deseret, they also were applying for statehood. This was largely a Mormon population. The biggest problem was slavery. A guy named Narciso Lopez, who was a Cuban in the United States, planned an invasion of Cuba and so that the U.S. could take Cuba and make it a slave state. He recruited 600 Americans for an invasion. Now, President Taylor was against this. He was in favor of neutrality. This threatened war with Spain. Cuba was still a Spanish colony, and that would be an anti-Spanish action. Anyway, Narciso Lopez went ahead. It didn't work out, and 50 Americans ended up being arrested by the Spanish in Cuba. And President Taylor worked for their release and was able to obtain it. Another thing he worked on was the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty. Now there was talk about having a canal in Central America, and under this treaty with Great Britain, the United States and Great Britain pledged that they would jointly build a Central American canal. So this was a treaty of friendship, and actually it never happened, and nothing happened for a long time. Eventually, many years later, the United States went ahead and built the Panama Canal. There was talk of Nicaragua. The U.S. built the Panama Canal on their own. The issue is by 1850, California, New Mexico joining as free states, the fugitive slave law. Political giants were near the end of their careers. John C. Calhoun was dying. Henry Clay was 71 and in poor health, and Daniel Webster was 68 and drinking heavily. Clay remained powerful despite his poor health. February of 1850, President Taylor met with the Southern secession leaders. There's talk of secession of states in the South from the Union. And he warned if they were, quote, taken in rebellion against the Union, he would hang them with less reluctance than he had hanged deserters and spies in Mexico. Now, the southern states were upset at the prospect of California and New Mexico entering the Union as free states, which would give the free states an advantage in the Senate, where there had been equality between the free states and slave states. Interesting thing, in 1850, this is before movies, but they came up with this, a panorama was painted, which was a mile long, and a mile-long scroll, a huge sheet of painted canvas, which was unwound from a giant cylinder for entertainment. This occurred in April. It was called Henry Lewis's Mississippi River Scenes. And President Taylor watched in the crowd as this thing unfurled. The scroll moved from left to right, and it was like motion moving pictures. It's kind of like early movies. And depicted in this mile-long painting in a scroll was Cypress Grove, his home. And that was the last time he saw his home, or at least saw it on this painting. And they had dramatic lighting. It sounds like a wonderful entertainment. And a lot of work for artists, which all ended with the arrival of motion pictures. July 4th of 1850, President Taylor was at the laid the cornerstone for the building of the Washington Monument. Actually, they had part of that ceremony, the dust from Thaddeus Kosciuszko's tomb was deposited. Kosciuszko was a national hero of Poland who had fought in the American Revolution. President Taylor was out in the hot sun that day for many hours. He got sick, got a fever, and died 5 days later. Reportedly, when he got back to the White House, he drank cold water, ice milk, cherries, and raw vegetables. And some say he ate too much, and so it's debatable what happened to him, whether he got food poisoning or cholera. The medical care was horrible back then, continued to be horrible. So he was bled where they, removing blood would help. They did this thing where they would burn him. They called it cupping. They put a hot cup against the person and burn them, in their ignorant belief that it would draw the disease to the surface. He received a massive dose of calomel, which is a poisonous mercury compound, and he dies. This is horrible. This medical care really hastened his death. And so the Whig Party had nominated two presidents who were both war heroes, both 60-plus, William Henry Harrison in 1840 and Zachary Taylor in 1848, and they both died in office, Harrison after a month and Taylor after 16 months. So the question is, what happened to him? Did he have cholera, or did he get sick from dirty drinking water? Now, he died July 9th, 5 days after getting so short illness. At his funeral, there was 150,000 people came at his hearse, and the catafalque was drawn by 8 white horses. Taylor's horse, Old Whitey, accompanied the cortege. Henry Clay and Daniel Webster were pallbearers. Now, but the day before he died, he's had this to say, quote, "I should not be surprised if this were to terminate in my death. I did not expect to encounter what has beset me since my elevation to the presidency. God knows I have endeavored to fulfill what I conceived to be an honest duty. But I have been mistaken. My motives have been misconstrued, and my feelings most grossly outraged." So he's talking about he was really having a tough time because this severe conflict between North and South. In fact, his presidency and then that of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, they all had severe trouble because the conflict was growing worse and worse and worse between North and South, between the abolitionist movement and those who supported slavery in the South. Zach Taylor died July 9th, 1850, in Washington, D.C. at age 65. His final words were, quote, "I have always done my duty. I am ready to die. My only regret is for the friends I leave behind me." He was buried in what is now known as Zachary Taylor National Cemetery near Louisville, Kentucky. So he was not buried in Louisiana. So he spent much of his life in Kentucky. Abraham Lincoln gave a eulogy for President Zach Taylor, quote, "Along the whole Indian frontier, through summer and winter, like a sleepless sentinel, he has watched while we have slept for 40 years. In General Taylor's public relations to his country, what will strongly impress a close observer was his unostentatious, self-sacrificing, long-enduring devotion to duty." Thomas Hart Benton had this to say, quote, "Zachary Taylor's death was a public calamity. No man could have been more devoted to the Union or more opposed to the slavery agitation. And his position as a Southern man and a slaveholder, his military reputation, and his election by a majority of the people of the states would have given him a power in the settlement of these questions which no president without these qualifications would have possessed." Yeah, some people think, well, if Taylor had lived, maybe he could have helped prevent the Civil War. We don't know. Now, unfortunately, in 1863, Zachary Taylor's personal papers were destroyed in the Civil War when his son's home, Richard Taylor, who was a Confederate general, his son's home was destroyed by Union soldiers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So that was a real shame, a real loss for history, which makes it hard to study Zachary Taylor. During his presidency, the issues of statehood for California and New Mexico were not resolved. And there's speculation that perhaps President Zach Taylor would have vetoed the fugitive slave law, which did become law and seemed to be an issue which led towards civil war. In 1991, Zach Taylor's remains were exhumed because there was talk that he'd been poisoned. However, the verdict when they analyzed his remains, that it was death by natural causes. Taylor's one of his biographers, John S.D. Eisenhower, wrote, quote, "Zachary Taylor was a man of the Union, one who placed the interest of the Union as a whole above that of his own section of the country. Perhaps as a lifelong military man, that trait is to be expected, but in fact that is a false assumption. Witness the choice, as the Union was breaking up, with the coming Civil War, made by lifelong military officers such as Robert E. Lee, Albert and Joseph Johnston, Pierre Beauregard, Stonewall Jackson, and many others. Taylor was truly the exception rather than the rule. Zachary Taylor was a great American, and the pages of our history are richer for the life of old Rough and Ready." Of course, we don't know what Taylor would have done if he lived until the Civil War, because that was a tough thing tough decision those fellows had to face. Biographer K. Jack Bauer wrote, quote, "The slave-holding planter from Louisiana emerged as the champion of exclusion of slavery from the Mexican War territories." K. Jack Bauer continues, quote, "Zachary Taylor was energetic, yet conservative and cautious in his actions. His defense of Fort Harrison proved he could handle men under stress, while retaining the flexibility which the military commander must possess if he is to respond successfully to the surprises on the battlefield. At Buena Vista, Mexico, he retained his composure under very difficult conditions and allowed his troops to fight their way out of near defeat." Zach Taylor was often not recognized because he wore old clothes, and there was a story of he wasn't misidentified or not identified, and a young officer apologized to him. Zach Taylor said, quote, "My young friend, let me give you a little piece of advice which may be of advantage to you. Never judge a stranger by his clothes." Another story of a young officer asked how to apologize to Zach Taylor, and the answer was, quote, "Oh, with Colonel Taylor, just forget it." And another story in Florida in the Seminole Wars, again, he was not identified as this top general, and a young guy had this to say, quote, "Well, old man, how are the Indians now?" And Taylor said, quote, "I believe, sir, that they are giving considerable trouble." And the young fellow answered, quote, "They are they? We will have to see to that. I am an army officer, and I am on my way to take a hand. Have a glass of beer with me, old codger, you and your neighbors." For these 3 videos, I read 3 books on Zachary Taylor. Old Rough and Ready, The Life and Times of Zachary Taylor by Silas Bent McKinley and Silas Bent, 1946. Zachary Taylor by John S.D. Eisenhower, 2008. And Zachary Taylor, Soldier, Planter, Statesman of the Old Southwest by K. Jack Bauer, 1985. So in conclusion, Zach Taylor really lived a noble life. He had 40 years, pretty much 40 years of military service, selfless service, and that was tough fighting the Indians. He was all over the country, and then of course became famous in the Mexican War and played a major role in the Mexican War being a victory for the United States, which added 38% to the continental United States. So he was a brave man, but more than that, he was a good man. He was very kind, and this is really a major reason why he was elected rather than Winfield Scott. People knew he was a good guy. He was humble, he was kind, and he also, even though he fought Indians and Mexicans, he promoted respect for Indians and respect for Mexicans. So he was a good man, and he really lived a life of selfless national service. God bless Zachary Taylor, a man who served his country well. Well, that concludes today's presentation. I hope you have a good history book to read or find one. There's so many amazing history books that are out there. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray, peterjray.com. So far, we've made 600 history videos in 7 areas. world history, American history, book reviews, poetic tours, Cleveland baseball, family history, and autobiography. You also might consider checking out our podcast, Adventures in History. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.